I'd like to ask Scott Barclay, partner at Data Collective, to come to the stage to begin our final panel.
Okay, we're going to assemble the panel. And Leah, let's do one more chair. Perfect. So as we're coming up, let's see. Raj and David, I think you still need to get mic'd. So it's okay. As we get started, just see the gentleman in the red. Perfect. And you're Raj.
Yes.
Great to meet you. Scott Barclay.
Nice. Pleasure.
Okay, everyone, thank you for being here. Give us a minute to organize ourselves. And as we do, I'll introduce myself briefly, tell you a little bit about how we're going to run this panel. From here to lunch at 1 o'clock, we're going to have both breadth and depth. Depth on what each of these companies are doing, and breadth to open the field to the questions you want to ask around hype versus reality of what's happening in digital health and neurotech and wearables. So that's a broad space. And we're not going to cover everything in 45 minutes, so we might as well enjoy it along the way. So I'm Scott Barclay. I'm a partner at Data Collective. We are very early stage, very deep tech, deep compute, early stage investors. We don't have a formula. There's two things that always have to be true when we deploy a first check onto a cap table. The first is that there's something truly exponential that's plausible, something that could shape the future of human trajectory that we can see very early as a team is coming together because of the problem and the specificity and the uniqueness of who they are. And the second is that at that moment or shortly thereafter, there's something very defensible, something proprietary, almost always either in the tech stack or in the data. So that's Data Collective. I lead a portfolio called computational care, which is that same notion, but pushing that compute closer to the patient. Or if I had to create my own fun name, I would call it crowbar capital, in the sense of taking a crowbar to the sclerotic system of how we provide care today. But none of this is about Data Collective or about me. This is about, let's talk about digital health and where this market is, and let's talk about these founders. So what I'll do is I'm going to take, actually I realized I was with two mics. You guys are really good. I'm going to take a seat. We're going to go through and just ask every founder to introduce themselves for 30 seconds and of who they are and the name of the company and the bullet point of what the company does. And then I'm going to interview each of them for 3 or 4 minutes, just so we keep it clippy and fast and everybody's getting the concepts on the table. Please be thinking of your questions, because then I'm going to have questions for the group, and we're going to turn it over and have questions from you relatively early in the process. So it's going to be a little bit messy and hopefully entirely enjoyable, substantive, and hopefully we don't take ourselves too seriously. Everybody, sounds fair?
Sounds good.
Okay, let's start on the far end. Do the 30-second version of you, your company, and what you guys do.
Cool. So my name is John Shapiro. My company is Data Garden, and essentially we turn data into music. And this originally started with a plant music installation, Secret Life of Plants style, converting GSR into sound. And we realized that there was a synergy between the subjective experience of people and the music the plant was making, and the way to bring that to more folks was to adapt our software to accommodate wearable data from humans.
Perfect.
Cool. Okay, my name is Daniel Ramirez. I work for Leo Pharma. I'm not a founder, but I support a lot of founders. Leo Pharma is a Danish pharmaceutical company with focus on dermatology, more than 100 years, and it is owned by a foundation. So that means that all the profits from the pharma company are reinvested in helping people with skin diseases. And that's reflected in growing the pharmaceutical operation, in giving grants for research. And lately, we are investing in technology. I'm part of the digital health unit called the Leo Innovation Lab. And we look for innovation that could predict, monitor, or diagnose skin diseases using data. And we are also investing and supporting technology that digitizes clinical trials across all the steps of it.
Hi, I'm Sean Lane. I'm the founder of Olive. Olive is a digital employee that works in healthcare. So Olive is a software robot that takes over a lot of the work that humans would typically do.
Hi, my name is Tony Rajiv Janeja. I was chair for the opioid task force in New Jersey for 3 years, essentially with 130 people dying every day. I knew that one of my main tasks was how to get one of the 3 FDA-approved medications into patients' hands. My background is adult psychiatry, addiction medicine, and integrative medicine.
You prefer to go by Raj or Tony?
Tony's fine.
Tony's fine.
Hi, my name is David Chen, co-founder and CEO of ApplySci. Neurotech is literally the only one company in the world founded by a Tibetan Lama. And my job actually is to digitalizing him so we can have all the good access to good guidelines for meditations. So we can enjoy all the benefit of meditations.
So in my experience, that's a really great job of being succinct when you put founders up on a stage, because the first thing we want to do is tell you for 10 minutes about what they do and why it matters and why you should care. So thanks to the panel. We're off to a great start. Please be thinking about your questions. John, let me start with you, but actually I'm going to go down the line. This is I've often found when I'm in the audience, I'm very quickly trying to make sense of, wait, these things are at different stages. They don't exactly look like each other. Let's give everyone just a sense of the journey. So my simple question would be, how many people work at the company or the project, and kind of how much money has gone into it? Because it's very different answers for each of you. So John, you first.
Sure, yeah. So it's myself and my business partner, Joe Patitucci. It's the two of us that own the company. We work with, there's a hardware component. We developed a product, consumer product out of the plant music device. And then the software component, which is something we're working on now with a few developers. As far as the money that's gone in, there's been about $30K that was raised as a Kickstarter back in 2014. And since then, we've been able to sustainably sell these devices. That's how we keep the lights on. We decided that revenue was the cheapest form of capital. But as we are developing this software suite, which I'm excited to talk more about, we're open to investment for that.
Got it. Daniel, you're from a much bigger organization.
Yes. Okay, so Leo is a 5,000 people organization, but in the Leo Innovation Lab, which is a digital health unit, we do two things. One, we create our own innovation or startup. So we have an incubator in Copenhagen, in Denmark, around 100 people, all different profiles like product owners, data scientists, developers, designers, everything. So we grow innovation from that incubator. But we also look for innovation outside, Denmark and outside Leo. And this is the team that I lead. I have people in China, in Israel, in Denmark, Canada, and I'm sitting here. So we also try to look for innovation outside. This effort started in 2015. And I would say we have created more than, 10 companies internally, and we have invested in more than 7 companies.
So in John, we've got Scrappy, LA-based, right?
Yeah.
Scrappy, LA-based, 2-person early team. We've got a Denmark-based incubator with large capitalization and have created 10-plus companies. Now, Sean, you're going to be the one that looks the most Silicon Valley-ish.
But not based in Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
So we're based in our global headquarters in Columbus, Ohio. That's where 150 people work, half of which are engineers. And we've raised just over 70 million, and we're all of it is employed by about 80 health systems.
Got it. Tony.
We're about approximately 30 people, but candidly, everybody up to this point has really been working on a consultant basis. We've spent approximately $1 million up to this point developing the technology and getting the contracts with large payers in place. Did that answer your 2 questions?
New Jersey?
New Jersey based, yes. New Jersey, New York.
And David, you're based here.
Yeah, we're based right here in Palo Alto. However, we are international right at day one. And we are very fortunate because our first investor is a Japanese angel. And it's in the low media already. Even we only have a handful of people, but we are international again. We have people working in France. And we have collaboration with a teaching hospital fully affiliated with the University of Toronto since day one. And even we are so small, handful of people, but people are surprised. We already have patent issue. We already have patent allowed it, and even more pending.
So Palo Alto-based, international and global from the beginning, international angels, and an international remit. Okay.
Yep.
Got it. Listen, this was my effort so people have a sense of like the building blocks on the stage. Mm-hmm. John, let's go a little bit deeper with you just for a minute. So now one of the things we all agreed was we won't do slides and long presentations because then the whole hour is gone and we haven't asked any questions. That said, I wish we could show your product. We can't. So you've got to give verbalization to how you bring sonification to human body. But you have better language.
Sure. Yeah.
Tell us more about what you can actually do.
Sure, and I'll preface this by saying I have a beta version with me here for anybody who would like to try afterwards. So the first iteration of our software is currently being licensed to the HeartMath Institute using their heart rate monitor. And we've developed a way so that each heartbeat is choosing a note in the musical scale. And then the algorithm that's grading your overall coherence, that's what's choosing different instruments and switching the timbral parameters and things like that. So that as a beta version is what we're scaling to accommodate input from any sort of wearable for any type of biofeedback. So if you make an EEG wearable, you would sort of scale 0 to 100. This is not the parameter we're in training. This is the parameter we're training. And from there, we can in real time create a musical soundtrack in which you're experiencing generative music created by your body. And the importance we see in this is that so much of data expression is visual, which is great. We're obviously a very visual culture, but I think meditation is a great use case where you want to meditate with your eyes closed, or for the exercise component where we can create music that is generative but sounds more like an EDM track. You want to be able to be on the go and have your eyes free as you're running. So bit by bit, license by license, we're accommodating more sorts of biometrics inputs, and we really see a lot of potential for shifting away from visualization into sonification or finding a way of combining the two.
Is the business model that if you have the world's best team building an engine that translates sonification to output, that you're really going to build like an engine plus API business where you license that capability into people who have product, a meditation app, a service environment, a Spotify running playlist? Is that the notion of where you could take this as a business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the original impulse to start working with biodata came from, we wanted to make a consumer app specifically for the Apple Watch, but because of the limitations of what you can get from the health kit, which actually have changed as of recently, so that's something we're reinvestigating. And in fact, a lot of our supporters are really interested by that capability. So we would love to create a brand, a direct-to-consumer app running on the watch. In the meantime, when we didn't have access to that data, we started investigating what did B2B enterprise sales look like. And what became interesting there was not only were wearable companies super interested in this, but other forms of music delivery platforms, such as music on delivery that helps you focus based on neurofeedback research. So the bigger picture is, yes, this would be a really easy utility to live in the cloud, where whatever wearable you have, you send information to and then receive music back. And that's where we're at right now, but we're going to start focusing some efforts to create the MVP for the Apple Watch app, which will help us with our original goal.
So from a call and response between you and the audience, do you have something you really want to accomplish in the next 3 or 4 months that someone in the room could help with? Or do you want people to approach afterwards with, oh, well, here's a use case where we should be working on it. Like, I want to go deeper because we have a project we should work on together.
Right. I mean, all of the above, really. Focusing on the Apple Watch, focusing on the consumer app, that's something that would have a pretty low cost and would be something that's really easy just to get out there. But then also, I would absolutely love to talk to anybody who's working with biodata. I'm sure that's like 3/4 of the room, because every time we iterate and incorporate a new input, we're making our sound engine more robust and adding additional functionality. Also super interested my background is as a musician. So there's so much research that can be implicated here as far as what are the sounds that are being generated. So thinking about binaural beats for EEG entrainment and things like that. So would also love to have conversations about research to determine specific user profiles. We have some people that we're working with that we're starting to ramp up our efforts and focus on machine learning, thinking about some of the music composition tools built on TensorFlow. So that you have like more robust sound being created, but then you can also start scraping people's Spotify information and analyzing those specific timbres that can be incorporated into the healing process.
I want an invitation when this turns into an EDM concert worth hundreds of millions in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I want to be there.
You'll be at the front row.
I know on all of these, there's a desire to dig deeper, so that's right at the point where it's like, I want to now ask 20 more questions. So instead, I'll shift.
Cool.
All right, so Daniel, you've got this incubation platform. You said 10 plus companies built already, an incubation team of 100. That's a little different than how we usually run the playbook in this neighborhood, but that's not a comment that says that's better or worse. You want to talk about some of the companies that have been created, or you want to talk about the approach that's going to create the 11th one. What do you want to talk about first?
Yes. First about the companies and then about the model that will allow us to create more.
Okay.
In terms of companies, I mean, we have created a lot of different, different groups doing different things, but I would group them into parts. The first one is this intersection between imaging and AI. Dermatology is very visual. So it's a no-brainer. I mean, you can use images to diagnose or monitor skin diseases, and we are trying to predict skin diseases using images. So in that area, we have created a couple of companies internally, one that does diagnosis of skin diseases using phone pictures, and the other one that does monitoring of skin diseases using the phone as well. But in addition to that, we have invested in two companies, one in the Netherlands doing assessment of skin cancer, and one in Canada doing diagnosis of skin diseases. So that's the first area, imaging and AI. The second area it would be the clinical trials part. And there's a interesting story there, because in this process of creating companies and apps and reaching out to patients, which is not very typical for pharma, we developed this growth hacking capability, which is just digital marketing. So at one point, someone was wondering, why don't we just try to recruit people for our own clinical trials doing this? So we said, OK, let's just do it very fast. We did an MVP, and it actually ended up working very well. So we started recruiting people for our own clinical trials, and there is even a CRO hiring us for recruiting people for their clinical trials. So what we have done is to do that and then start extending it through the whole process. And now we are creating a virtual clinical trials platform in Europe. So that's the second area. And the third thing, which is related to how do you plan to find new innovation, I would say what we observe in digital health is that we need to de-risk a lot of technologies, or at least make them focus on dermatology. So first of all, I mean, there's a lot of innovation, but not all of them focus on dermatology, and they could be focusing on dermatology, so it's about calling their attention. But on the other hand, there is, I would say, a proliferation of sensors and data points and even molecules, if you look at the AI drug discovery trend. So we are putting models to try to pick the good ones and then support them. In terms of molecules, for example, we have this open innovation platform where we give for free, or we test for free in vitro molecules. And then no strings attached, we give them the feedback, and if we find something promising, we can partner maybe with that company. That's a great model because it's a cost-free, risk-free. It gives value to the entrepreneur, and it gives value to us. And we're doing the same in digital health. We ran a hackathon in Israel some months ago looking for passive data that would help us predict maybe a flare-up of psoriasis or another skin disease. And we found that there are several companies doing voice analysis related to stress and mental health issues, and we know that stress and some other mental health issues could trigger a flare. So right now we are doing a proof of concept with several of these companies to see, can we see if we can predict a skin disease? If we can, then we get into deeper relationships. So probably this answers to the questions that you want.
So holistically, the audience should understand, so this is a foundation-owned pharma, and this is the innovation hub within it.
Digital.
And there's a real mission around skin.
Yes.
My question is, I have a couple questions. So if there's a bright, new, smart, think of those wonderful, Stanford, Palo Alto-based, cross-disciplinary, 4-person team, 4 founders. One is PhD computer science, one is a dermatologist, one is a health researcher, and one is a back-end developer. Mm-hmm. And they're sitting in Menlo Park. They've taken a couple $100,000 of angel money. And they think they want to work on a specific question, and they've really started to apply computer vision to the skin in a specific way. That startup, do you want to meet them? Should they talk to you because there's mechanisms, data, and clinical trial capabilities? Or should they think, no, that sounds like a large company and convoluted, and they can build stuff themselves, so that's the competitive enemy?
Yeah, no, it's more the first scenario. Actually, we are doing it already. And our philosophy as Leo Ventures is, no matter if we invest or partner with you, we try to deliver value to you, give you knowledge or connect you with someone within dermatology. So if there is any idea that you want to talk to us, want to get some validation or feedback, just reach out. Because, we can look at it, we can build it together, we can say, no, this is not the direction, it's that direction, whatever, but we are fully open to that. Yeah, we are, I would say, not naive thinking that we will create everything internally. Yeah. We are very open to the external.
So my broader question, which had to do with kind of the foundational backing, is that, and it's not a judgmental question, I'm I'm teeing it up, but no sharp elbows. I think my spirit is clear. So on one hand, because there's a mission around skin, I would imagine that could be kind of mission clarifying, brand clarifying and mission clarifying. On the other hand, as a foundation, are there times when you see startups and you think, they have like a capitalistic energy that it's harder to infuse? One part Danish culture, one part larger company incubation culture, where while there's great mission, it's harder to get people focused as early stage capitalists the way that a pure seed stage startup might look like.
Yeah. I mean, we focus a lot on sustainability. We are a 100-year-old pharmaceutical company, so we don't act as a foundation. I mean, Leo Pharma acts as a business, and it tries to be competitive as a business. So in the companies that we try to look for in the market, we expect them to be high-performing in regards to business. So we don't have any problem with any capitalistic. I mean, they have to grow and they have to be self-sustainable. If we can help them to grow faster and have a more impact on the patient's life, that's great. But we are looking for sustainability, not for.
Got it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Great answer. So last question, in a sense, I've now uncovered 10 questions, and so I should then move on quickly. When you make a venture investment, I understand, like we all know what that looks like. When you've incubated them out of the platform, is your desire to control the asset and take it into the ecosystem?
Yeah.
Or are you quickly wanting it to become independent where you're a minority shareholder and it's living in its own kind of sustainable, it's going to make it or not as a business?
Yes, there are three different scenarios. One, it doesn't work, we kill it. So we try to kill things fast. The second, it works, but it fits with Leo Pharma very well. So we just try to integrate it with Leo Pharma. And the third one is it works, but it has a wider scope than Leo. So what we do is we spin them out. We spin them out, we invite external investors, and then we just remain as a shareholder of part of it. And it has happened already once, and it's happening with a second company now.
Okay, perfect. Like I said, I'm right where I have 10 more questions, which means I should push on. So Sean, thank you for being here. And David, we've by chance put you at the end, so thank you for your patience.
No problem.
Give us a couple more minutes. Sean, 80 large system customers, 150 people sitting in Columbus, Ohio, which unless you were lucky to be on the cap table around something like Cover My Meds, you may not realize is one of the true scalable, repeatable health IT hubs in this country that most people don't realize. So AI going after the administrative tasks. Mm-hmm. Let's be a little more specific about the use cases where you're already eating into either they can't find people to do it or they're sitting in cube farms and not doing a very good job of it.
Yeah, so I mean, generally we look at, in healthcare, $3 trillion, $1 trillion of its administrative costs. So we're trying to go after that $1 trillion, hoping to push it to other areas, right? So what Olive typically does is revenue cycle, supply chain, finance and accounting is where we start. But we'll look at an organization, and using computational ethnography, we look at everything that the human is doing. So every click, every keystroke, every decision that they're making. And we'll look at that based on as much historical data as we have, maybe a couple years. We then cluster that in a tool that we use to then determine which circuits, and a circuit is basically a end-to-end workflow, which ones that we can start to replicate. And we start to build the software robots to replicate those workflows. We then use computer vision to interact with whatever software tools we need to. So Olive will log in with a username and password into email, into the EMR, or whatever software it may be, and just work like a human inside that software after we've trained her.
Okay. I want to touch a couple of use cases. It's, again, not sharp elbowed, not skeptical.
Sure.
So I was looking at something last night and was basically told we're spending about $9 billion right now per year, just paying administrators to do medical coding.
Yeah.
About 60% ambulatory, 40% inpatient, predominantly in cube farms, although there's already a fairly robust, basically outsourcing model.
Sure.
And then you've got Optum, 3M bought CodeWrite back when I had less gray hair. So that's a $9 billion industry that still sounds really inefficient.
Yep.
So are you already eating into that specific use case?
We're beginning to. I mean, we think we're going to have a pretty tremendous impact when we are doing about 2 billion hours of human equivalent work per year. which would equate to about 1 million humans, right? So there's 8 million humans that need to be doing other things right now in healthcare. So that's the way we think about it. So coding is interesting because you can do it rules-based. We can look at like the Milliman guides for coding and all of that. But what we tend to prefer is really a deep learning approach. So we'll look at all the data, all of the information that the human was looking at. We'll look at the human decision. We'll train it on the optimized human decision that actually provided the better outcome. And then we just build a deep feed-forward neural net in order to do that. So that's kind of the approach that we prefer to take. So it doesn't matter what the task is. It doesn't matter what the coding rules are. We just allow Olive to learn how to do it like the best human did it. Just faster and more accurate and without mistakes, and never taking holidays.
Who is the decision maker to make the purchase? And what does the sales motion look like to that contract where you bring it back and ring the bell?
So it's a good question. So I'm not from healthcare originally. I'm an intelligence officer by training. Actually, I worked at NSA. But so when people said healthcare had long sales cycles, I didn't know what that meant. But now I do. But we do about a 6-month sales cycle. So it's pretty fast for healthcare if you're familiar. It's but I either sell to the VP of revenue cycle because that's where we can get in very, very quickly, or I go to the kind of chief transformation officer and say, let's target 1,000 FTEs, so about 2 million human hours, and I'll get those back for you in a year. And then we kind of transform the entire organization. So we want to be, we think over the next couple of years, 30% of the entire workforce inside healthcare will be digital. And so we want to be that workforce. So either at the transformation level with a large organization or at the kind of VP rev cycle level.
Now, I know in the questions we're going to talk about, well, what is happening to these workforces and when is that a good thing and a bad thing and how do we society? But you're going to ask that great question, so I'm going to let you. I want to ask about another use case because it actually goes to another heart of this and I wonder if you come upon it. And that is, so the use case is, let's say, let's do medical prior authorization.
Yep.
So there's going to be an episode, the provider system's already made the diagnosis and even said, okay, well, we're going to do this. And we start the process of lining up the details to pre-authorize it with the payer.
Yep.
And you and I, we then enter into like fax hell, generally, like if no, in most of these environments. So what I'm really telling is a different story. So there's a really great, arguably the world's best infrastructure-focused digital health investor. And I said, hey, I've seen like 9 companies doing this medical prior auth. But each one, first of all, they're not aware of the others. And each one is inside a kind of oligopoly and haven't even realized how they would try to sell to another one. And her response was, well, that's because you're not working very hard. I've seen 23. So my question is healthcare so oligopolistically siloed that these use cases actually sit within each of these little mini industrialized vectors?
Yeah.
And is there any way to get a flywheel going where it's, look, this is a solved problem, and we're going to solve this way everywhere,
Yes.
whether it's prioritization or coding, or you tell me, no, the better one where we're going to first start to do that is this one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So prior auth is a huge thing that Olive does, probably the second most common use case. So the interesting thing that we've figured out about healthcare is that most of the wisdom or the human knowledge about how to do these administrative tasks and how to do them well and how to uncover money and reimbursements, it's all locked in the brains of these people in these oligopolies, as you say. So what doesn't exist is this content delivery or aggregation system where I can take methods and approaches and use cases and workflows and different methodologies for unlocking this value and put it into one content stream so that I can then apply it to so I want to be able to take like Mayo's best approach to something and give it to a hospital in rural Georgia. I want to be able to take all the wisdom of the consultants that have helped organizations create more margins. I want to take that and put it everywhere. So the idea is creating this, when we're using Olive to do that, we call it the collective, and the collective is basically a collection of all of the methodologies and methods that we're putting into Olive's brain. And then the unique thing is that unlike administrative employees, humans, every Olive talks to every Olive. So when one Olive learns, all Olives learn. So it creates this ability so that Olive in Georgia can talk to the one at Mayo and say, hey, by the way, I have some information for you, and pass it. So it creates, interestingly, every software robot is a router, so we're creating a network. So every time we deploy 1,000 olives, we grab 1,000 routers.
I see my job is not to ask the best questions, but to have teed each of them up just to the point where you're competing for whom you want to ask your next questions to. So Tony,
Yes.
You might be the one closest at the intersection of what is the science telling us and how do we apply empathy and digital tools to solve a specific problem. So pain management is a known cluster in this country for the past 20 years, but now we're in an opioid epidemic.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how you came to the problem and like what do you do right now to help?
There are 130 people that are dying every single day, right? So 70,000 last year. There's 3 FDA-approved medications currently on the market for opioid use disorder. The first one is methadone. You have to go to a methadone clinic. It's not allowed to be prescribed in a private practitioner's office unless it's for pain management, which is very limited use there. But there are 2 other medications that are office-based, one being buprenorphine and the other one being naloxone. Now, there are a couple of things to keep in mind there. There's only 2,500 board-certified addiction psychiatrists in the country. There's about another 5,000 addiction medicine physicians. These are usually internal medicine docs that are doing addiction work. So the number of people that actually can prescribe these medications, not even mentioning the stigma and all the other issues you have to overcome, are quite limited. On top of that, 90% of the ex-waivered physicians that can prescribe those medications are in urban areas. So if you look at a heat map, there's tremendous gaps in the country where individuals with opioid use disorder just don't have anywhere to go. So the science tells us, going to that the brain changes, the chances of relapse are 90% within 90 days without treatment. 90%. So the old model of detox is absolutely ineffective for the most part. We know that patients that are detoxed within 5 days come out with cravings. There's also something called post-acute withdrawal syndrome that can last up to 1 year. So clearly, there's no question the medication saves lives, right? So then the number one task that really that came upon me as you know, when I was on the task force was how are we going to expand services? How are we going to get these patients to these physicians that can prescribe the medications? I mean, the DEA last year did allow now nurse practitioners and PAs to start prescribing these meds, but in general, again, it was very limited. So that was my number one challenge, is how to figure out a system, to develop a system where we could get the patient to the doctor. But I also knew, in terms of biopsychosocial spiritual, that medication was only the starting point, right? You had to also teach people and help them understand the psychology of their use. Why were they using in the first place? Which self-states were intolerable that then they would numb out temporarily with the drug or alcohol? In both cases, that's relevant. But so the psychology of it. So when we first went to United Healthcare, really we had a 90-day program. And essentially the thought was, 90 days, we know these changes in the brain start reversing in terms of the downregulation of the D2 dopamine receptor system. And so they came back to us and they said, listen, we'd like a 52-week program. So insurance companies and payers, they're very, very quickly, they're learning and certainly have learned that for every dollar they spend on behavioral health care, they're saving $6 to $7 downstream in medical costs. So they came back to us again saying, can we do a 1-year program? So we transformed this into a 1-year program. I'll pause there.
Let's jump to the solution. So when I hear you talk, I think it's urgent, it's a crisis. We need something that is scalable,
Yes.
but clinically appropriate. And so I know that part of your answer is going to be telemedicine, so I know you got there somehow.
Yes.
And I'm immediately jumping to the next question of, well, who's the network of clinicians appropriately on the provider side of telemedicine?
Right.
Because we know that if you got it right and you got the right marketing, this could be into hundreds of thousands of homes.
Yes.
So my question is, who's on the provider side, and just how many patients are you touching today?
So basically what we did is, so for example, in New Jersey, we identified 10 physicians in the state, 3 in the north, 3 in the central, and 4 down south. So depending on where the call is coming in from, we send that patient to that physician. We let that person do what they do. They prescribe it, let them do the medical management, let them check the liver function tests, et cetera. In terms of the psychotherapist, again, the psychotherapy could be delivered remotely. That did not require the one-time face-to-face federal requirement. So again, the therapy is delivered at home, along with the groups are at home. Now, essentially, there was there were two ideas. One was a B2B idea and then a B2C idea. But the B2B, out of the 33,000 patients in New Jersey in 2017, 2018 numbers are similar. There were only, I call this the 1882 rule, 18% of patients had commercial insurance. 82% of them did not have any insurance at all. Of the 82%, 56% have state benefits. So right away, and this is where the core of my work is right now, I just was on a panel with the Commissioner of Health in New Jersey on Tuesday, really talking about how do we now get the state agencies to back this whole approach up. Because otherwise, there just fundamentally are not enough patients. So there's approximately 70 to 100 B2C consumers on it right now. And what we're doing in the B2B model, so for example, Corning Incorporated, up in the Corning Valley, they went to United Healthcare, they wanted more MAT services. So in the next 60 days, we're launching that pilot up there.
Got it. So it's just operating in New Jersey presently?
New Jersey and then New York.
So is it reasonable that what's going to happen here is as you're productizing and programmizing the whole thing,
Yes.
it's the Uniteds of the world who are looking at this problem and can see the pockets, can see the lack of coverage in western Nebraska or whatever is the specific areas where they see hotspots. Is it the payers who are present in New Jersey who at some point will just say, we've got to take this to these other regions? Or is it like, I think this week is the national meeting of national governors. Is it going to start to be a state, the state is the incubation place, and where others are going to say, we've got to look to New Jersey, and here's the hard results, that we need to replicate this in other markets?
I see actually all of these different agencies, in terms of legislators to the clinicians to the insurance payers, everybody's looking for a solution, right? You will see a lot of these individual solutions are popping up. So this one may have just the, you can be video recorded, maybe blowing into a breathalyzer for an alcohol issue, or there are these remote services available, or if you go into a hot zone, your list of people get emailed. But really what we did is we tied that all together. So where I really see it, and actually surprisingly, the insurance payers have been pretty motivated to figure this out, because I think they're spending really upwards of billions of dollars trying to treat this population. So they actually have been very helpful in getting these pilots organized and started.
Have to keep moving.
Yeah.
So David, I'm going to come to you last, and thank you for being patient. So in my research, what I was getting up to speed on what you've been working on, I really get two adjacent concepts.
Sure.
It's all around wearables for well-being. Mm-hmm. But then I immediately get into a bucket of one is ways to help the individual better self-center. So things like meditation. You'll give me better language. Uh-huh. But then the second I noticed was you called it an almost entirely different product, which is using wearables to facilitate better human communication and relationship.
That's a very good question. Actually, we have 3 product lines instead of 1 or 2. And the way we look at it is we are not alone in society, and emotional life is a very important part of our existence. So we have to take care of ourselves, our loved ones, and our elderly. And that's why we have 3 product lines. And in terms of the relationship, because, for example, I found myself have a very difficult time to remain calm if my wife is upset with me. And so we are all intervened in a way. And so we have no way to just taking care of ourselves as an island successfully. And that's why we say we need to take care of ourselves first, maybe with meditation to have more robust mind. And we also need to take care of our loved ones. Otherwise, my life is still miserable. And then we have elderly people, our parents and so on, to taking care of. And the connection is also important because that's the emotional part come in. We cannot just taking care of their physical body without taking care of their emotion. And so the wearable for well-being here means we want to detect issue early on. Let's say when a mom it's upset, and then the husband probably want to know earlier. When the kid at school, have fight with another kid, probably won't tell you, but probably want to know.
Can I back up and just ask a simple question? So
Sure.
give me a physical distillation of the wearable. Is this something proprietary, or is this a software layer where we're connecting our Apple Watches and our Fitbits?
Sure.
So if I were to take part in a beta, what would I be wearing?
Okay, that's a very good question. We have a three-stage approach in terms of the business plan. The first stage is we try to utilize whatever wearable already exists.
Okay.
So that will be an app-only approach, and that will give us the minimum investment and the shortest turnaround time. And then we want to go from there to develop our own specialized device in order to detect more emotions. And
Do you have that device already? Is that
yeah, we have prototype to show.
okay?
And then after we come up with this kind of commercial grade device to help the relationship and so on, and then we want to go through the trial in order to get to FDA approval.
Got it.
And then it becomes prescribable.
Tell us what the prototype is going to look like.
They are different kind, and we didn't finalize every single detail yet. And we are looking into wearable internal wristband, and we are also looking into hearable inside your ear. And there are also some other possibilities.
Yep. And from your previous language, I want to be clear on this notion of having wearables that are computing and understanding your emotional state and communicating it to others. I would assume there's a kind of consent and opt-in process, so similar to the way, so I'm an Apple user, and the way that I deploy my understanding and of where each child is. I would assume you'd have a similar mechanism of people would only opt into groups where they want to be sharing this information.
Sure. It's actually intended only for your loved ones in a very close circle.
Okay.
And we don't want to look into your data. And so what we are trying to do is to take whatever physiological signal we can take and then go through the AI interpretation to understand the mental state of the person. And then, of course, you need to decide what kind of data you're going to share with whom. And the other side have to agree, I want to receive this data or not. So it's not only one side, it's two sides. You need to agree what kind of data to provide to who.
Yeah.
And then the receiver need to agree to receive the data too.
So the company is called Neurotech. And just my question around this journey is, if there's someone in the audience who wanted to try this, is it purchasable? When or how can someone interact with it?
We're probably about a year away. And right now we're still in the stealth mode. And so you can see almost nothing on the website.
I see. Okay. I hope I haven't said too much. This is my humble effort to try to pull out from everyone about where they are and what they're doing. So let's take a few questions from the group. Just pop right up to the mics. Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
I think a critical issue for all the companies up there is finding the right distribution channels. So I'm wondering if somebody has a comment about how you've solved that problem or how you're functioning with Leo Pharma. You are the channel for many of your members. But John, for example, how are you planning on partnering to get your products out?
Yeah, so far through personal relationships, just by reaching out, a lot of companies, especially wearables, are using pre-recorded sound, and there seems to be a trend right now of people wanting to devote effort to a generative sound composition platform. So yeah, I've just gotten so much positive response by reaching out, coming to conferences such as these. There's a lot of people who are saying like, oh, we're at this point where the playback, they see the value of audio and how that would be bolstered by having it done in real time. So that's for like the B2B side of things. Now at the same time, we have a pretty strong community from our hardware product, which is the plant music device. And so through that, there's a lot of people that are interested in accessing our music more often. We actually have an online plant music radio station at plants.fm. And people are already listening to that for usually the shortest listening session is a half hour at a time. And we receive so many questions of how can I do this at home? And that's when we tell them about the hardware product. So once we have the B2C version targeting our network, which we've already grown organically, and once we have a few more B2B clients, we can ramp up our sales efforts.
And Sean, you got to 80 provider systems. We talked about the buyer. Did you build a direct sales force? Just tell us a little bit more about that motion to the gentleman's question.
Yeah, 100% direct. So in the 80, I mean, we're talking 250 hospitals probably, and all said and done. It's challenging. So channels are definitely a conversation that we have constantly inside the organization. I just hired a CRO, and I'm trying to think about indirect, specifically like VARs, like value-added resellers. I haven't quite nailed it yet. I mean, we're talking to several who want to be partners. They want to distribute. The challenge is what value did they add? Do we let them take some of the services implementing, around it? We want to really, really protect the experience with Olive because she's ubiquitous. So if they don't like Olive, they will never like Olive again. And we think it's important that we have a really, really curated experience. But to give you a sense, we are a software robot company focused in healthcare, and we've had good growth. I mean, tripling year over year. But software robot companies in other industries are growing like crazy because they've effectively used channels. Yeah. So I'm definitely keen on figuring it out. We just haven't figured it out quite yet.
I think someone once said that who knew healthcare was complicated, but I might miss that one.
And the last question of the conference. Make it a good one.
Question for Tony. I was wondering if you could elaborate more on your United Healthcare contract. I mean, given you're such an early stage business, it's unique that you have great traction with a big payer like that. So if you could talk a little bit more about how you got there and also how they're measuring outcomes from working with you.
So basically, before something like this option was available, there were really only a few options. One was either you went inpatient rehab type of thing. Then there was the intensive outpatient program, which were 3 to 5 days a week. And outside of that, it was going to a private clinician's office. So the idea of a bundled payment for United Healthcare was very attractive in terms of value-based care. And so we basically, that's what we negotiated, that if we delivered X services, that we would get reimbursed. And if it was below 50% of that model, we would get half of that rate up to 1 year. They were also actually giving us 3 months prior authorization right off the bat. The Aetna contract took actually half the time to get that the United did. It took about 18 months for the United and took about 9 months for that. So we are early stage in that sense, absolutely right. But I think insurance companies, again, are really realizing, if you think of cardiovascular space in terms of diabetes, they have teams of nurses now that call on patients, asking them how they're doing, did they take their insulin, and so on and so forth. So this idea of really patient chronic care management is certainly something that they're really, really supporting now.
Well, I'll just conclude by thanking our panelists. They all did a great job, and they trusted me to interview and not hopefully be too hard, but also not too pansy-ish. But also just to say, Lisa, this is a wonderful aggregation of intellect and people in the room over a day and a half. Everything's been very gracious. I think we're all very happy to have been here, so thank you for having us all.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. It was a pleasure to host you. We hope to see you again. Our next conference will be on November 14th at Harvard, followed by next February here at Stanford. Oh, and we know that many of you are heading for the airport, so we have some boxed lunches, so just grab them and go.